And as I said, look, the time on this is 2:30 to 2:40, pardon me, to 3. People come and go as they need to, but I'll stay as long as you need me to or want me to. Sure. And ask anything, stuff we talked about or stuff we didn't.
Evan, why don't you have an app?
We had an app, actually. We had an app in the first couple of years, and we made a decision that responsive design was a better strategy for us. This is back in 2011, I think, 2012. We've gone back and forth about whether having an app would make sense and whether we could do more commerce, transactional business. It would be aided by having an app. We just have made the decision that we're where we are and we're comfortable with where we are. And believe me, the thing about this place is we never stay in one place if we think we need to be in a different place. And, I think there's constantly a conversation going on about whether we want to have an app or not. And we just have never gotten to the point where we thought that the benefits of having one outweighed the benefits of not having one or where we are. We're not hostile to apps. We just haven't figured out a reason to pivot.
I forgot what my question was.
Yep.
Earlier, you showed a slide where you showed your revenues and the increases in revenues over the last 10 years.
I showed the total. I think it was the total revenue.
The total, yeah.
Right.
I would actually be interested in hearing a little bit about the expenditures and from year 1 to year 10, where you've spent those revenues in terms of, pieces of the pie and whether
Sure.
or not, how big of a piece of the pie marketing, if any, was.
Okay, so let me give you, the marketing conversation is going to be pretty short. Exactly. It's the big goose egg. We do not have a significant marketing budget. We have a meager marketing budget at best. One of the interesting conversations for us heading into the second decade is whether we have to go a little bit more traditional with the way that we allocate the money we spend and spend more money on marketing and spend more money on kind of traditional brand uplift out in the world. But let me go back and talk to you a little bit more anecdotally, since I don't have a slide to magically call up by snapping my fingers. Let me go to the question of expenses. So we really began raising money for the Tribune partway into 2009. I'm going to kind of commingle revenue and expense, but go with me. I'll get to where you want me to go in a second. We started raising money for the Tribune partway into 2009, and we set as a goal, launch was going to be November the 3rd of 2009, for the partial year of 2009 that we wanted to raise $3.5 million. Why? I don't know. I don't remember. I'm not going to give you some bullshit story about why that number was the magica. I have no memory of exactly why that was the number. Like so much of what happened in the early days of the Tribune, it was sort of plucked from the ether. That's the number. Fine. Boop, $3.5 million. We raised just under 4 against that goal of 3.5. Okay. Then we get into 2010, 2011, and 2012 and the planning for what we're doing, and truly we have no idea what we're doing. But we say we're going to raise $3 million. Our goal is to raise $3 million a year in calendar years 2010, 2011, and 2012. And if this thing succeeds enough to the fact that we're around for a 2013 and beyond, we'll then deal with what we're going to do at that point. So $3 million a year for each of those 3 years. And we said from an expense standpoint, we're going to lose $1 million in 2010. We're going to lose $500,000 in 2011, and we're going to be break even by the end of 2012. That was the goal. Now you could tell that it was total bullshit because those numbers are so round, right? We were like, what sounds good? Well, we're going to lose $1 million in the first year, $500,000 in the second year, we're going to be break even by the third year. So on the revenue side, we said we would raise $3 million a year for the first 3, and we raised actually, or a total of 9. We actually raised, I think we raised 15 in the first 3 years. We raised some significant amount of money beyond that 9. We were almost to the penny, $1 million to the bad in the first year, but we were more like $270,000 to the bad in 2011 versus 500, and then we were break even, I think, by the end of the first quarter of 2012, and we've been never looked back from that point. Every year, we have been more income than expense, I believe, and there may have been one year where it was just up against, but up against, but basically we've been more income than expense every year. And 2, I think, consequential features of the way we've budgeted and spent is we set a budget. Our budget year is our calendar year. Our fiscal year is our calendar year. So we present the board with a budget for the calendar year. We're going to bring in this much money this year. We have always exceeded that number. And on the expense side, we've said we're going to spend this much, and there's always a delta, income more than expense, some amount. And we always come within a percentage point or so of the expense budget that we set. We're very disciplined. And it's not, there's no art to that. It's easy to be close to being on when the lion's share of your expenses are on people, and that's a controllable expense. I mean, if you just don't like get drunk and hire a bunch of additional people, you're right. And fixed costs like how much does the rent cost? I mean, this is a low overhead operation, relatively speaking. You should have seen the shithole country that was our office for the first 7.5 years. I mean, this is fancy compared to where we were for the first 7.5 years. We are crammed in on one on top of another. And the reason is donors are not paying for us to be officing out of what will admittedly be a dated reference, Helmsley Palace, right? Donors are not expecting that the money that they're giving us for journalism is going to something that is not journalism. And when I think about the expense footprint of the Tribune, I think that the money goes to people and technology largely, and the expenses associated with the kind of reporting that we do. That's what they're spending money with us on, and so that's what we're spending their money on. So we're pretty disciplined as far as that goes. I think our payroll budget this year is somewhere in the vicinity of $6.5 million out of a total spend of 9.6. I think we'll probably close the year somewhere in the vicinity of 9.6 million. And we'll raise about 10.2 million. So we have actually a significant gulf for us between income and expense this year as projected. And here we are in the middle of October, and as I'm looking to the last lap around the track, I actually think we're going to hit both those numbers pretty close. So that'll be a net 500,000 plus or minus, or almost 600,000 in the bank over where we started the year. You know, there's no, again, I'm not trying to not be specific about it, but they're pretty mundane expenses. It is people, and it is a cost associated with, it's a big state. You know, I'd love to be Ann. I don't think, how big is Vermont? Arlington, Texas, maybe? I mean, what's the size of Vermont? I get from one end of Arlington to the other pretty fast. But we have people who, you know, are constantly traveling from one end of Texas to another. Southwest Airlines is cheap. It isn't as cheap as I'd like it to be sometimes. It's relatively modest as far as that goes. Now, how has the expense footprint grown year over year, kind of is your question? I would say high single digits to low double digits on balance, right, year over year. There was a year a couple of years ago where we looked at the growth of the Tribune and we said, let's be sure that we don't grow so much that we collapse under our own weight. And I think that the expense year over year, that year we said we're going to do about 5%. That might be the smallest percent increase in expense. Typically, it's more like 9, 10. Here's what I can tell you. Where we increase costs, we invest in our people. We have never not given raises. We have never not given bonuses at the holiday, not even in that first year. We have never not invested in the culture of this place, in the employee experience in this place, because the strength of this place, the success of this place, are the people who work at the Tribune. We're not running a sweatshop. This is not the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory of journalism. We are running a place that respects the people, embraces everybody and their life choices here. We have very generous family leave policy, maternity and paternity leave policy, sick relative policy, 4 weeks of paid vacation. We have built an employee culture around here that understands that our strength and our success is our people. And so where we spend money year over year, more than the previous year, it is almost entirely in that.
Well, this morning you mentioned that you cover every part of, or you try to cover every part of population of society. I mean, at least Texas society. So I'm wondering that, are you guys considering to cover also the Spanish-speaking part of it?
Most definitely. If you look at the strategic plan of the Tribune, we call out specifically the acknowledged reality, right? Everybody acknowledges the fact that the changing population of Texas is going to be more of a factor in the editorial decisions we make over time. We are We have a number of native Spanish speakers at the Tribune. We're looking to hire more people who are native Spanish speakers. We're looking to partner more with Spanish language television and radio as a way to reach the emerging Hispanic population of the state. Now, I think it'd be a mistake to assume that everybody in the emerging Hispanic majority wants to consume the kind of content that we create in Spanish. There are best practices that relate to that tell us, well, maybe, you know, that's an important element of it, but we don't need to suddenly translate all of our content into Spanish or do a separate Spanish language social media channel feed, or, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go at that. But look, the population of Texas today is 43% Anglo, 57% Texans of color. It's about 40% Hispanic, but 57% of the population are Texans of color. By 2040, according to one plausible scenario the demographers predict, we're going to be 55% Hispanic, 2040, and 32% Anglo. Think about that. By 2040, a supermajority of the population of Texas will be Texans of color. And a majority, an outright majority, will be Hispanic. The population of the public schools of Texas already, 5.5 million kids enrolled in the public schools of Texas, 10% of the enrolled public school students in the country, second only to California in size. Already 53% of the enrolled public school students in Texas are Hispanic. We have a significant challenge in terms of reaching all emerging populations in Texas, not just because as it happens, the fastest growing ethnic population in Texas over the last 10 years is actually the Asian population, which on a percentage basis has grown faster than any other population. So we have a lot of challenges as far as that goes, but we're conscious absolutely of the demographic inevitability that is the narrative through line and everything in this state. And so we are devoting significantly more resources to that subject broadly and called out specifically in our strategic plan, and are hiring and making budget decisions specifically to meet that goal, and are right now actively searching for somebody in leadership who will be a native Spanish speaker who will also lead a lot of our multimedia content creation efforts, specifically for the purpose of giving us a greater presence on Spanish language television and radio and making decisions that will allow us to build for the future of the population of the state.
Can you talk more about self-interest in large donors and underwriting, for example?
Self-interest.
Self-interest.
Meaning what?
Meaning Walmart's not sponsoring TribFest solely because they believe in a stronger democracy. And so when, strictly hypothetically...
What do you work for, Kmart?
No, I work for worse. I work for her.
Yeah. All right. So why is Walmart? So Walmart's $150,000 cash out of pocket presenting sponsor of the Texas Tribune Festival every year. This is not like the New Yorker Festival where they're getting an ad schedule and they become a presenting sponsor in exchange for the ad schedule. They are spending $150,000 in cash to be the presenting sponsor of the festival.
And do you contact them?
Well, I don't.
The local Walmart people, or do you go to the national?
No, it's corporate.
It's corporate.
So why do corporations support the Texas Tribune? Let me give you a general answer that April would probably give you if she were here herself. I made the mistake foolishly at the beginning when I knew literally nothing. I know slightly more than nothing now, but at the beginning when I knew truly absolute nothing. You go to the ballet, you see the American Airlines sponsors the Nutcracker at Christmas time. Well, that's coming out of the community relations budget that the corporation has locally, or if not locally, then regionally. I assumed that the only opportunity we had to get corporate support was going to come from the community relations budget, the give to give budget. Turns out that there's actually a couple more doors you can go through. There's the give to give part, there's the give to get part, and there's the give to market part. The give to get part is really about getting access to your audience. So who reads the Texas Tribune? Every single elected official in Texas, their senior policy staffs, lobby, the decision makers, the influencers, the opinion shapers, everybody who matters. I'm not slagging the Austin American-Statesman, but let me just use them illustratively for this moment. If you're a corporation and you want to reach the sort of key decision makers, influencers, people who affect the outcome of these policy fights, people at the center of all these big discussions, if you spend money with the Austin American-Statesman, it is effectively machine gun spray. You're getting the governor and a woman who lives in the Pecan Grove RV park and everybody in between. If you spend money with the Texas Tribune, it's a rifle shot. It is an efficient buy. Everybody who reads us largely are people who these folks want to get in front of. If you're General Electric or you're Archer Daniels Midland, why do you advertise on Meet the Press? It's not the largest audience. It's the right audience. We deliver the right audience. And, you know, it happens every session. They do a deal where they say to all the people in the legislature, which Twitter feeds do they follow the most? We are always at the top. The people in that building read the Texas Tribune to learn often about what is happening in that building, right? They have come to view us as their must-read, their first read, and their all-day read. So it is not simply that they're giving to us because we're a 501c3 and they want to support the mission of the Tribune. They're also, in very much self-interested ways, to pick your phrase, they're trying to get in front of those people. But then the third thing is, if you look at our readership, we do audience surveys. We know who our readers are. We know what their education level is, what their income level is, what their median household income and home value is. We know what their propensity to do things like eat out and buy books and travel and all that. We are off the charts in terms of all of those demographic indicators that drive decisions by marketing and advertising divisions of these corporations as well to want to be in front of the audience. It's a little bit like a more conventional advertising buy in that respect, right? So here's an example. All the private banking divisions of all the big financial service companies want to spend money with us because they want to be in front of our audience, because our audience are their current or future, they believe, customers, clients. So it's really through three doors. We get money through the community relations door, we get money through the government relations and lobbying door, and we get money through the advertising and marketing door. Sometimes we get money through multiple doors. Sometimes we get money from all three doors. If you've seen one corporate spend with a nonprofit news organization, you've seen one corporate spend with a nonprofit news organization. There is no consistency. I mean, everybody's got their own different reasons for wanting to do it. I'm good with whatever those reasons are, right? You know, I mean, we all know what the deal is here. It's not advertising, it's sponsorship. What's the difference again? Can somebody tell me? I mean, we operated at the beginning on this idea that, well, you know, only 8% of the money that you take from corporations is transactional, can be transactional in the sense that it can be fewer than 2 clicks to a transaction. Are there rules governing this stuff? I mean, we just play it straight down the middle as much as we can. And we work with everybody. And by the way, we have competing brands also in all these spaces that all spend money with us. And we make sure that we give them the space that they need. You know, in the same way that you had a Walmart ad and a Texas Monthly, you might say is a certain number of pages before you then had a Target ad. You know, we try to give everybody their own little beachhead. But it's all good. And whatever the reason they give us, they give us.
On Facebook and Twitter, to some extent, they keep wanting me to pay more money, you know, to promote our stories, and I certainly want to promote our stories, but I guess the skeptic.
Oh, screw that! Oh, screw that!
No.
I'm just so skeptical of the value of spending money to promote your stuff on their platform. Nah, come on. I mean, I just think that like you could. Aren't there like 50 other things you could spend money on than that? Personally, is that a terrible answer? No. Okay, good. No, I mean, I just think, well, like, why? Yeah.
I'm wondering how much time you spend in the fundraising side of this work.
I'm going to give you an answer that's an educated guess. 30%, maybe? Maybe 40%. I mean, what's fundraising? Is it the act of asking somebody for money? Is it going out and giving a speech in some place where ultimately there may be an indirect? I mean, in the literal act of asking somebody for money, I don't think it's literally 30% even. Yeah. Yeah.
Solicitation process and everything that he's participating in is a smaller percentage. But the reason I went higher at the beginning is because, you know, I mean,
always be raising.
Yeah, you're always raising. And so anytime he speaks in public, as I mentioned earlier, you know, that's an opportunity. when he hates going to events that aren't ours.
I hate going to
So
events.
sometimes I take that role on, but you're always doing things.
Can I say a word about that, though? And then I'm going to give you one other example of something where it's not, you wouldn't say, well, you're spending time fundraising, but you're actually fundraising. Some of you are in the room are old enough, as old as me, and remember the Bugs Bunny cartoons where Bugs Bunny would be her. What is it? Is Bugs Bunny a her? Her hands and knees crawling through the deserts on the verge of starvation and on the verge of dehydration, and looks ahead in the distance and sees a fat guy and a skinny guy and imagines a hamburger and a hot dog. The problem is that in about year 3, I could not walk into any room socially and see anything other than hamburgers or hot dogs. Like I'd lost my ability to have human relationships with people. And I just decided to stop going to parties because all I see is hamburgers and hot dogs. So like 3 weeks ago, that's just true. So like, because I'm just sick because I can't, I'm like always like, oh, that person, like, stop. About 3 weeks ago, I was on a Sunday night, I was, before we were getting ready to announce this ProPublica thing, we had a little bit of money we needed to raise before we were comfortable that we had what we needed in hand to announce this. And so I was thinking, well, who can we get some support at launch from? And there's a foundation that had not supported us, because, although we'd gone to them a bunch of times and said, support us. And they're like, we like to support things that nobody else supports. We like to support things that, so we would something differentiated and come back to us again when you've got something that might be of interest to us. And I thought, well, this ProPublica partnership is something that's maybe in there. So I was watching a baseball game on a Sunday night at my house, and I thought, I'm just going to send an email to this person. And then so I wrote a long email and said, here's what we're doing, confidentially, everything else. And the result of that email on a Sunday night watching a baseball game, one eye on the baseball game and one eye on my computer, was that we got a $100,000 gift. Was I fundraising or was I watching baseball? I mean, this is my point. I don't think it's necessarily about the traditional definition of the job when you're allocating your, like, the answer is 100%. Frankly, the answer is 100%. Because no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, there may suddenly pop up an opportunity for me to ask somebody to support us, and I'm not going to miss on that opportunity.
Always be
closing.
Sir. So we're in the process of converting to a nonprofit, and in doing that, I found your original pitch deck whenever you guys were doing this, and we kind of I said, well, that seemed successful, so let me put this together. I didn't actually use it to pitch, so to speak, but kind of say, hey, how does this work? And along the campaign trail, I found that most people were interested in seeing some sort of pro forma, seeing some sort of business development strategy that would yield numbers over zeros, right? And it strikes me that, you were able to do this without, I don't want to say you hadn't done the work before, obviously long career in journalism, but I guess this is all a long wind up to say, how did you do it?
I have no idea.
Was
everything that you would think at startup you would need to have done or have in hand, we hadn't and we didn't. No business plan, no website to show anybody, no mock-up of the website to show anybody, no feasibility study, no research. I had this right here. This is it. Seriously, not much more than that. And I don't say that with anything other than mystification and wonderment, because that should not have been enough. I had done journalism in Texas for a long time. I had relationships for a long time. And I suppose if I'm honest about it, the byproducts of the work I did at Texas Monthly allowed people to believe the pitch that we would be down the middle and that we were not going to favor one side or another, and that we were serious, because I had always been serious. Even that, as a true explanation, is probably not adequate as an answer to your question. I knew people, John Thornton knew people certainly, and so we used the knowledge, knowing those people and going to see those people as a way to get in the door and ask potentially for support. But I will acknowledge that I don't have a real good answer for you, because we probably needed other things that we didn't have. If you're going to do this, we didn't have them. People had faith in the idea that we put in front of them, and that turned out to be at least enough at the beginning. Now, look, that only lasts for so long. The proof by assertion stage very quickly gives way to the proof by proof stage. You're only given a certain number of months. I mean, the best part for me was the nonpartisan thing, right? So you tell people we're going to be nonpartisan, and they go, So we said, well, we need to actually go at this. And so we went to see, we said to some friends of ours who in both the Republican and Democratic policy and political universes in Texas, we said, would you put a thing together for us? This is like October of 09. We want to talk to you about what we intend to do. We want you to hear from our mouths that we're planning to do this thing totally down the middle and all that kind of stuff. So we met with the Democratic folks, and that was fine. And then we had a meeting with the Republican policy people. It was about a dozen or 15 political consultants, pollsters, and we said, look, we're planning to do this, and it's going to be totally nonpartisan. And they just were not buying it. I mean, it was a much easier sell to the Democrats that we were planning to be nonpartisan than it was to the Republicans. And, I mean, the Republicans thought this was a Trojan horse, and in month 3, the stomach would pop open and Angela Davis would jump out. I mean, they were absolutely convinced that this whole thing was a plot. And I just don't think that anybody believes you're serious until you actually do it, until you actually have something that they can look at and go, okay, they're serious, right? So in some ways, any of the plans that we did not have, any of the things that we could have shown people at the beginning, all would have been theoretical anyway. On the way to my saying that the only way that people actually take you seriously and believe what you intend to do is when you actually do it. When you prove to them, this is what I'm going to do. If you actually have something to show people, then that actually matters.
Hi. So earlier in the day, I know you talked a little bit about diversifying your audience.
Yes.
And Sarah talked about how you're kind of exploring this Texas for Dummies newsletter. But then at the same time, you're kind of talking about corporate sponsorship, and a lot of your draw is the fact that you have such a singular focus and a singular audience, which as lawmakers is probably rich white men, to be honest.
Well,
so,
it is Texas.
Yeah, it is Texas. But I just want to know kind of how you are balancing those two things when it comes to editorial and audience and just everything in the
Well,
organization.
I would describe the audience strategy as dual, right? We get both people on the inside and increasingly people on the outside. I think the easy lift at the beginning was just to get all the people who were already in the conversation, but we knew that was only the beginning. And the effort that we're putting into audience development and growth is absolutely outside the inner circle. Look, it's possible that we can deliver the inside audience to a Walmart or to a JP Morgan or to an AT&T, but also reach hundreds of thousands of people for whom this is not a daily or persistent conversation. I think that actually it's entirely possible, and in fact, the only way to succeed is if you are reaching both people on the inside and the people not on the inside. This would not have worked if we had not proven our case with people on the inside. But we knew from the very beginning that it was not sufficient. It was a necessary but not sufficient condition from an audience development standpoint, just to reach people on the inside. So we spend a lot of time not in Austin and not in these inside circles, talking to regular people about the issues that are of great significance to the state as a whole. And again, what I talked about earlier as well was the idea of push, not pull. We need to go into these communities and say to people, this is important, you need to pay attention to this, and we need to make the case to you why this is something that you should be reading on a regular basis. That is where the real opportunity exists outside the inside circle. But if we had just had a mass circulation or mass readership play here at the beginning and that we were not concerned about reaching the people on the inside, I don't think that would have worked. I think this was the sequence. And we're now very aggressively in the audience development phase outside the inside circle. And I would encourage you and everybody else, judge us by our success at that. We're very serious about it. We're going to devote all of our time and energy to building that audience as much as possible. Sir.
Hi, I'm a former MS colleague of yours.
You worked for MS, huh?
Atlanta Magazine.
And you got out with your life.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little, you mentioned John Thornton before.
Yeah.
How important was he or someone like him, and without him, would you be here today?
Well, he gave us $1 million with his then wife at the beginning at launch, which was absolutely important. We raised another almost $3 million, not John Thornton. I mean, having somebody who wants to give you $1 million is better than not having somebody who wants to give you $1 million. Could we have done this without his $1 million? Yeah, I think so. Did it help to have his $1 million? Oh, yes. In the second year, he gave us another $1 million as a match against dollars raised major gifts. And that's been pretty much it. I mean, one of the interesting things about John's involvement, which should never be diminished or minimized in the telling of this story, is that John has basically only given the Texas Tribune personally $2 million in the first 2 years, and we've raised $74 million. In the case of some organizations, the founders' contributions are a much larger percentage of the total amount raised. In our case, I'm actually proud of the fact that John represents about 3% of the money that we've raised over the 10 years. John has been a board member of the Tribunes from the very beginning. He was the chair of the board early, quickly gave way to not being the chair of the board because he had other things he wanted to do. He wanted to go back to his business life, and now in the last number of years, building and launching the American Journalism Project has been his focus. It's a little bit like, Daddy divorced us and married another woman and now has a second family, right? That's AJP. Maybe we'll see him at Christmas, or he'll take us to a ball game, but that's pretty much it. But I talk to John every couple of days. John, we're great. And I rely on John's business sense and his commitment to this stuff. John is serious as a heart attack. He's not a dilettante. He's the opposite of that. John could have gone off and, built a house on a pile of money someplace if he wanted to. He didn't have to be continuing to do this stuff. But I think he started AJP because he really does have this stuff in his veins. He believes in this stuff. But do I think having a John Thornton or a Buzz, what was his name in San Diego? Buzz, or Warren Hellman, who was the initial money contributed to the Bay Citizen. Do you need to have that person, or Herb Sandler for in ProPublica's case? I don't think you have to. I think that the money is there. It's a little bit harder at launch if you don't have that big infusion initially, but I do think it's possible. John's been significant to our success, but our success has not been because of John. I think John would say that if he were here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you've said a couple of times that you went into this knowing nothing, which I don't entirely believe.
Oh, it's fact check true.
But I'm sure since then you're a student of how nonprofit news works, and I'm just wondering, as you look around and as the, not competition among each other, but certainly competition for funding and competition to kind of get up and running, and certainly to a Tribune level, is getting pretty stiff in this space. Is there 1, 2, 3 things that you see as pitfalls that stand in the way
of succeeding,
of success?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to sort of I'll riff here. I don't know that they're 1, 2, or 3. It may end up being 4 or 5 by the time it's done, and I don't know that this is any particular order. But the biggest mistake that you can make, is to assume without a grant agreement in hand that donor in year 1 is going to be donor in year 2. The grantee should never take the grantor for granted, right? I see this all the time. And frankly, as much as we've tried to avoid that as a pitfall, we've fooled ourselves into believing our own bullshit as it related to the support we're going to get. Donors are fickle. Rich people are fickle. Foundations are fickle. You think they love you and then they don't, or they love somebody else more, or the person responsible for the giving portfolio at institution X leaves and takes another job, and somebody else comes in and the strategy shifts, or that person's a big pain in the ass all of a sudden. I mean, seriously. You can't count on anything. And I think one of the mistakes people make is they get off to a good start, they get a little head of steam behind them, and they go into another funding year and they make assumptions about the support they got last year being the support they're going to get next year, only to discover actually no. So I think that's actually something that I would say is a pitfall that can be avoided. The second thing is to assume as a founder or as a leader of an organization that everybody else is as into this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as you are. I am 10 years into this, and I have not learned my lesson. And I think I drive some of the people who work for us a little bit batshit, because there's not a moment when I'm not the CEO of the Texas Tribune, and I'm not thinking about the Tribune, and I'm not thinking about every aspect of this. The people who work for you are not required to have that same mania that you are. And you're expecting them to have that same mania is unreasonable. And I need always to do better at that. And looking over at somebody who I texted at 7 this morning. And that's late, exactly. And that's late. The third thing is, you're not in the fundraising business like the mafia, you're in the collections business. And I cannot stress enough the importance of accepting and understanding what I'm saying. Expenses are constant. Cash collections are like this. And you can very easily get yourself into a shit pit if you assume that just because somebody commits to giving you money, that means they're going to pay you on the timetable that you set, right? There are foundations that talk all the time about how much they care about journalism, and they commit to giving gifts, and then you have to chase after them like they're dodging the fucking bill collector. Seriously. And I don't think people fully appreciate or understand how many nonprofit news organizations are one delinquent foundation payment away from not being able to pay their employees. Now, we've never been in that situation, but I am continually frustrated by the extent to which we are in the collections business. How many times I walk out of this office at the end of the day muttering, "Fuck you, pay me," to myself. Seriously. So I just think you have to be realistic about the basic economics of this and the degree to which your fate really is in the hands of other people. How's that for 3? You like that? Good. Yeah.
So, Evan, we had a chance to talk with you yesterday.
Yes.
And I wanted to just repeat a couple of those questions that I asked so that the rest of the group here could hear them. One, I'll knock them off here. One, you are obviously a force of nature, and you just admitted that you kind of live and breathe this in a maniacal sort of way that almost nobody else does. Could the Texas Tribune ever have become what it is without either you or someone with your passion and skill?
Sure, because you know what? Absolutely. It would have been it would have been somebody else. And it wouldn't have been exactly the same. But I've always been skeptical of this idea that any institution is reliant on or dependent on an individual. The success of this place no longer relies on me or any one person. And if I were hit by a bread truck tomorrow or today walking out of the building, the Texas Tribune would be here tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the next month, because we've built an organization that relies on the strengths of many people and the passions of many people. And just because they don't do it necessarily the way that I would have done it or did it doesn't mean that the place can't continue to grow and might even be better off, honestly. So look, the question is often posed to me about whether there are people in other communities who are in a position to step up and play the role that I or somebody else here played. And the answer is yes. And if you haven't found them, you're just not looking in the right place yet. I do think there are people who care enormously about this stuff, view it as a public service, as a public good, and are evangelists in the same way that we've all become evangelists. I do.
So let me just follow up with the one other question that I asked you yesterday, which is, I'm not sure I agree with your self-assessment, but that's all right. But Texas Tribune is 10 years old.
Right.
You have been, in many ways, the North Star of digital news startups in this country at a time when, over those 10 years, maybe 15,000 journalists have lost their jobs, and journalism clearly is in crisis in America. No one, or very few, but I'm not even sure anyone, has gotten close to the scale and size that you are over those 10 years. Whether that's because of you and your own personal drive or whatever it is, we're all here because you've done something that nobody else has done and no one else has been able to emulate. And that's one of the questions. I mean, we can pick through all the different secret sauce, you being one of them, but everybody talks about the secret sauce of Texas Tribune. But the real question, I think, for all of us is that question of how to not just learn particularities of how you do things here,
right,
but what is the broader lesson that can allow this to be emulated, this to be a model that is replicable.
So I think the important thing when you think about replicating what we've done here is not to try to replicate what we've done here. Right? I think it's really important not to make the mistake of thinking that the answer to every community's news desert problem is to take the Texas Tribune model, like you're buying something off the shelf, bring it back home, unpack it, scrape off the word Texas and write Vermont or Idaho or what have you. I said to you yesterday, if you've seen one nonprofit news organization, you've seen one nonprofit news organization, and I believe that. They're all different. What works in Texas works in Texas. We know Texas better than anybody, but we don't know Nevada. As I told John Ralston when he came here to learn about the Texas Tribune model before going back to start the Nevada Independent. As I told Andy Lack when he came here before giving the initial gift that seeded the creation of Mississippi Today. We don't know Mississippi, we know Texas. I don't think the Texas Tribune model is replicable. I don't think it ought to be, and I don't think it is. Because Texas is not those places. There are things that we've done that set up as strategies or tactics that can be, where appropriate, lovingly borrowed, taken back home, and put into effect. But the only ones who know what will work in your community are the people in your community. So I don't think it's a question of whether the Texas Tribune can be replicated elsewhere around the country. I think you have to do what works for your community, and where we have made decisions that are relevant in your community that you can learn from, we want to be here to help, and we want to be here to model and help you think how that can be translated through to your own situation. But at the end of the day, what works in your community is what works in your community. If we can be an inspiration for some people to try it, that's great. If some of the things that we've done, say the big Texas Tribune Festival, which you've now heard some about today, can be an inspiration in Seattle for Crosscut to start the Crosscut Festival, or the folks in Madison, Wisconsin to start the Cap, what is it called? The Cap City, whatever their version of this is. I think that's great. I mean, I certainly believe that there are aspects of what we're doing that can be and should be potentially attempted by other people in other places. But, you know, Anne's done a great job at Vermont Digger without needing me or anybody else to tell her what she should or shouldn't be doing. And, you know, she's done it in her way and on a scale appropriate to her market. Texas is big. There would have been no way to do this small and succeed. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Something else I told you yesterday was we had 17 full-time positions on the first day. I had to make a decision, I and others here had to make a decision about how to divide those up. How many of those would be business side positions and how many of those would be content side positions? And as I looked at it, we had a choice. We could have a perfectly staffed and functioning business side and nothing to sell. Or we could flood the zone from a content standpoint in the Hal Rainsian sense, and we could have a business side that was not really up to the task of monetizing that content yet, but would ultimately be backfilled and rise to meet the need. Did I want people to think that we were a great business, or did I want people to think, oh shit, their journalism is significantly better than even they hyped it in advance to be, and then suddenly have a problem that we didn't have the business infrastructure to leverage and capitalize on that opportunity? And I absolutely chose the latter, and I would do it again. if the choice on the front end is invest in the business side or invest in content, the answer is invest in content. Because once you limp out of the gate, having invested in the business side and not in content, people go, they weren't really serious to begin with. And you don't get a second chance to make that first impression. So I don't think it has to go the way that it went for us. I don't. We know why it worked and what didn't work. I mean, we made a horrible mistake at the beginning. Rodney would be able to tell you, although Rodney was not here at the time. Rodney has had to live with the byproducts of this. We thought that we were so fucking smart that we didn't need to buy a content management system or a contacts and records management bit of software off the shelf. We're just going to build our own. Why? Because we're awesome. Why do we want to spend the money on Blackbaud or Salesforce? Who needs that bullshit? Why do we need to buy an existing CMS? We'll just build our own. God, that was the stupidest thing that we ever decided to do. We're still living after all these years with the DNA of this original content management system is somewhere baked deep like a turducken, chicken inside turkey inside duck. In the current content management, we never actually threw the content management system that we built over the side of the boat. But we just essentially, But the CRM, we decided after a few years, and we gave it up, and we ended up joining Team Salesforce, and we never looked back, and that was the right decision, and we were much better off for it. But you do things at the beginning that you think are right at the time because you're too stupid to know different. There's just no one answer, is the point. Like everything else in life, there's a million wrong answers. There's no one right answer. It doesn't have to be my right answer. It just has to be a right answer. Anne had her right answer. We had our right answer. They weren't the same. So, yeah.
Evan, thank you for the shout out. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm the biggest Vermont Digger fan there is.
Well, I'm a huge,
come at me, bro. Watch what happens. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of what you've done. And I'm really grateful that you've led the way. And I think that one of the things that gives me a lot of heart for everyone in this room and for the evolving field is that finally, after 10 years, I think we're developing some industry standards.
Yeah.
And so you can start on a WordPress platform and be okay with no money. You can use News Revenue Hub to get an efficient donate page up.
Right.
You can. So there are tools now that didn't exist when you
10
and I
years
started,
ago. That's right.
right?
That's
and
right.
that gives folks in the room a head start, which I think is really encouraging. So you could, I think, really start from nothing and prove yourself in the marketplace and make a little money on the side based on the quality of your journalism as you go now.
That's right. Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's right. I thought 10 years ago we were on the cutting edge. Here's the reality of when we launched 10 years ago, which was November 2009. We were 6 months out from the first release of Apple's first tablet, iPad. Snapchat did not exist. Slack did not exist. Instagram did not exist. We were in the Stone Age. We thought we were on the cutting edge, and we were in the Stone Age. This is all moving very fast. And what you're talking about, and other things you didn't mention, did not exist when we started. And had we had the wisdom to avail ourselves of those things, we might have, we might not have. But we couldn't have because they didn't exist. So maybe take one more or two more, and then we gotta wrap this up. Yeah.
So I'm curious if you can just give me a quick example of what your day-to-day job entails. Like at this point in your CEO, and also where did you go to CEO school?
I didn't go to CEO school. School of Hard Knocks, buddy. There's no CEO school that I went to. I learned while doing. I'm self-taught in that respect, or taught by everybody here and by the experience of being in the job. But I don't have anything that I can point to and say this was the way that I got educated at this. I give a lot of talks to conferences and at colleges and universities and to other groups. And I mean, 3 days out of every 5, I might begin the day, yesterday morning would be an example, at a conference talking about the political environment. I typically talk about, roughly speaking, 2 things. I talk about the political landscape in Texas, what's happening now, what's going to happen next, in all likelihood, based on what we know. Or I'll talk about journalism / the Tribune and what we've put together here and learned over the 10 years. I'd probably say that the political conversation is 75% and the non-political conversation by 25%. By the way, a hack to suggest to all of you is we have a speakers bureau that April Hinkle, did you all talk about this? Yeah, April manages the time of the people here. We get a lot of requests for people from the Tribune to come and speak at conferences. And we said at the very beginning, this was a smart decision we made that we did not know enough not to make, but we didn't have any special wisdom on this. We said, we're going to get a lot of requests for people on the Tribune staff to speak at conferences. Those conferences all have budgets to pay honoraria to speakers. What if we set a policy that nobody from the Tribune will go speak at a conference for free, but nor will anybody at the Tribune personally keep any honoraria that is given for that speech. Instead, we'll say to the conference organizer, donate it to the Tribune, and you'll get a small advertising schedule on the site in exchange for that, but you have to pay X to get anybody to come and do this. I think we will do somewhere on the order of $350,000 this year in fees associated with people from the Tribune speaking at conferences. And that was something that in a million years when we started the Tribune, I never imagined would be a legitimate revenue line, would be speaking fees. But it happens. So I might begin the day speaking at a conference. I spoke at the Gulf Coast Power Association conference yesterday in downtown Austin. And what they wanted was a bunch of people from power companies in Texas and Louisiana. And they wanted me to come and talk about the legislative session in 2019 and look ahead to the next election year. And I've got a standard speech that I give that I change out from time to time, but it wasn't a heavy lift. I can do it in my sleep at this point. And that's a $5,000 donation to the Tribune by this conference. That's the amount of money, that's the basic fee that we charge if somebody comes and speaks at a conference. I spend a certain amount of time in meetings here talking about, we're getting into the last quarter of the year. Where are we on the budget? We have a new CFO who just joined us this week, actually. So we're trying to get him onboarded, get him as comfortable with the financials and understand where we are, where are the potential opportunities for us to do a little bit better than we think this year on revenue, where are the challenges on the expense side that we need to be sure we're looking at carefully. I've got an executive committee meeting on tomorrow morning at 9. I had some prep to do for that. I did a little bit of fundraising over the course of the day. We had a significant political story break yesterday, the release of a tape of the Speaker of the Texas House, which was like Christmas, the Olympics, and my bar mitzvah all at once. If you're a news junkie. I can't get the guy to 76 votes to be reelected Speaker based on what's going on right now, but there's a longer conversation that will be boring to everybody but you, William. So I'm going to wait on that. We had a podcast recording scheduled for yesterday that a different member of the staff was going to host, the weekly news podcast. And we made it, so let's make it a live event, invite people in. I'll actually host it. We'll have the reporters talking about the tape. So we did that yesterday. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. It's unusual to have a week like this week when I'm in Austin for 5 days. Next week, I'll be out of town for a couple days. I just looked ahead to the first week in November. I think I'm gone every single day to a different place that week. I'm the brand ambassador in chief. I think that the job of anybody who leads one of these organizations is to constantly be out hoisting the flag aloft, living within all four corners of the mission at all times, and supporting the organization by promoting the mission and by helping to raise the money and to raise awareness of what you do. And I think that's an all-in job. I am not the leader of the newsroom and have not been for some time. And while there are parts of me that really miss being involved on a day-to-day basis in the news that we break and report and produce, I comfort myself by saying I used to be a journalist and now I pay for journalism. I'm good with that. And I love this job. It's going to kill me one day. Let me do one last one, okay?
Yeah, we got one last one. Before we do that real quick, I just want to know, before you all leave, if you are going to be getting together on anything after this event, my email is on the attendee list. Please let me know, and we can all gather and meet up. And with that, last question.
Yeah.
First, thank you.
You're welcome.
Scaling up and not burning out.
Scaling up and not burning out. I want to be helpful and hopeful and optimistic and tell you that it's possible to scale up and not burn out, but it is much more likely that you're going to scale up and burn out, or that people on your team are going to burn out than not. And I don't want to tell you the truth and give you some fantasy situation in which it's okay, it's all going to be fine. We have grown precipitously over the last couple of years. Well, you always try to do it with grace in class, but it's always going to be clumsier than you think it in the moment. You're not going to anticipate everything. We moved from one office to another. We grew the staff significantly over the last couple of years. We grew our budget significantly over the last couple of years. There is no question that there are people who are burning both ends of the candle and are burning out, and that there are negatives to this. There's no question about that.
I just add in that we've, and some of us are better at this than others, but we've also brought into that conversation, what are we going to stop doing? If we're going to do more of X, something's got to give. And so we have started being a little healthier about, I guess that would be the way to say it.
I think addition by subtraction is preferable to addition by addition. Sometimes addition by addition is really the only way to go, though. It's hard, to stop doing things. And sometimes you shouldn't stop doing things, right? This is maybe a good place for us to end, because I do think that there's something to be said about going back to a time when we all had lives other than the places we work. I remember a time in my life at some point when that was the case, and I've lost track of what it was like to not, this is a great example. So I'm going to go play tennis tonight, which I do is the only other thing other than work and family. I play tennis a bunch of times a week. And so a couple hours from now, I'll go play tennis. And I have a debate with myself almost every time I go play tennis about whether to take my phone out of the car and leave it in my bag. And I've started to not do it, not take it. And it's weird to be away from my device for 2 hours. Like I'm down to the level of that shit, seriously. It would be really good if we could all figure out how to put a partition between this work and not this work. The problem is that many of us who are running these organizations it's a pretty small group of people. It's just really hard to disengage or to unplug. And scaling up often means that you're just piling more on top of more on top of more with the few people you have who are shouldering that burden. I don't really have a good answer for you. I think people do burn out. I think you're going to burn out. No, you'll be the only one. But I also think if you've built something that you're proud of and that you believe is having the impact that you want it to have, there's a lot of pleasure to be taken in that. I mean, the old cliche, success is its own reward, kind of is legitimate in this case. If I'm in the supermarket on a Saturday freaking out about what I'm not doing at the office, and somebody comes up to me, as almost always happens, and says, I just want to thank you for the Texas Tribune, it's sort of worth it. I feel pretty good about that. So I got to run off to a meeting. I apologize. Thank you all. Thank you for coming in.